It's another International Women's Day video. We're kind of nearing the end here, getting closer and closer to the last day of this. The theme for International Women's Day was inspire inclusion. And so by now, if you've watched any of these videos, you know that I'm just interviewing women who inspire me and who I love. And one of those people who I love is Alison. Alison and I met in college, in undergrad. So we've known each other for a million years, at least it feels like it. Have kind of been along for each other's ups and downs over the years. And so when I was thinking about interviewing, I was like, oh, I need to talk to Alison because she has this really interesting background and interesting things she's doing now. So I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself however you want, tell the people who you are and whatever you want them to know about you.
Yeah, thank you so much I feel like it's a real honor to be able to be a part of this journey with you, this life journey and this like new journey that you're on right now. Thank you for inviting me on that. So I'm Alison Nail-Malone. I am a serial entrepreneur. I have been in the corporate world in HR for a long time, and then I lovingly broke up with corporate about 8-ish years ago, opened up my own consulting business that focused on HR consulting, and it kind of morphed into really focusing HR consulting, ensuring that nonprofits and small businesses, primarily women-owned small businesses, had access to HR consulting, executive leadership coaching, training and development instead of it being a luxury.
Yes.
And then about a year ago, I opened up a kind of second line of business. It's consulting in a different way. A lot of people still have not heard of this profession, but I call it an ancient practice, newest profession. I'm an end of life doula, grief educator, and coach. I still run both businesses because apparently I can't sit still. I'm also a mom to an amazing bonus kiddo, and I've been married now for 7 years.
At least because I've been in Europe for almost 7 and I married you.
Yeah.
At least 7.
Sorry, Tim.
I'm like, don't say 6, don't say 6. It's already right.
We've been together since 2016, so somewhere in there we got married and you married us, and it's been awesome since then. And so I live in Northwest Arkansas, which most people know this is the world headquarters of Walmart, J.B. Hunt, and Tyson. And also recently has been dubbed the #1 mountain biking capital of the country, of the USA. Interesting. I know. I
love it. So tell me a little bit about, like, describe for people who might not know about this kind of doula, grief educator space that you're in and kind of newly in. Like, what is it? What do you do? What does it look like? You know, and because some people probably have heard something, but they're like, or they might know what a doula is, like a birth doula, but maybe they don't know what this is. So I'm super curious of how you describe it to people who don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love the reaction that people have when I tell them either that I'm an end of life or a death doula. And this like grief educator and coaching. The grief education and coaching isn't so like shocking because I've been a coach for a long time. I've been a credentialed coach for a long time. And grief is a part of all of our journeys. But this end of life death doula work, the best way I know how to describe it is providing end of life consulting services and support. I primarily work with people who are caregivers, but caregivers and their loved ones so that they have emotional, physical, spiritual, and mental support during the dying process, before, during, and after, and then also providing that grief support. I also support people who are on their dying journey. And so kind of peeling back that a little bit more is, you know, one of the things, and I'm sure we'll probably get into this, but one of the things when you are a caregiver, and I speak from personal experience, when your loved one is going through the dying journey, it is really hard to be fully present because not only are you in this experience with them, you're grieving it, you're anticipating what's getting ready to happen, but you're also having to figure out all the logistics. Yeah. If you're the person that kind of navigates, like for me, I was the executor, decision maker, advocate. And also the one that just kind of, herded my family together to go through this experience as
Yeah.
well. And then, there are clients that I have that are like, I don't even know what to do with any of this.
Right.
And so, like, even just guiding through the emotional support, most end of life doulas are non-medical support. However, there are more and more medical professionals, particularly nurses and CNAs, who are like, I do not want to work in the system anymore, and that they have been transitioning more and more to become a death doula.
Yeah, I mean, you've spoken to one of my very best friend, Jaleesa. Like, she's a nurse practitioner who has spent her life in the ICU walking people through the end, and is like, I want to do this differently. Right. I mean,
Yeah,
she does a great job and she holds that space beautifully, but she's like, I want it to be different. Right. And I totally recognize that it seems like there is a shift happening.
absolutely, absolutely. And I love that you use that phrase, doing it differently, because, well, one, for me, all throughout my life, I'm the one that always talks about the hard things that nobody wants to talk about.
Right.
So it's evidence even like when I was in college, and when I got out of college, and then like along my career, like in the things that I advocated for or publicly spoke about or wrote about were always topics that were really uncomfortable. And I just have like a natural propensity. I don't do it on purpose, actually. I just get super passionate about something, and most of the time, the topics that I talk about that are uncomfortable are the topics that I have been going through, or just went through. And when I started Malone Consultants Group, and even the coaching businesses that I had prior to that, one of the things I always kind of phrased was doing leadership to be, do, and lead differently. And then when I started doing this death doula work and this grief work, it's like, we need to do this differently. We are such a grief and death illiterate society, just like globally, except for there are many cultures who like do it, I don't want to say right, but just do it justice and do it with honor.
Yeah.
And so I think that was another reason why once I kind of got through like certification and my credentialing and like taking on case studies and pro bono work, I was like, this is just kind of like a natural progression from all the work that I've done throughout my whole life. And I want to see it done differently.
Yeah. No, I love that. I do. I mean, so I think, I was a birth doula. And what I always said was holding that space. I mean, it's obviously very different, but it is also entry and exit, right? There's a beauty to that symmetry, right? But what I would often say when people would ask me about it is like, they would say like, oh, are you replacing the dad? Are you there? And I'll be like, no, I'm there so that he can actually become a dad.
Yeah.
And be supportive of his spouse, or and I'm talking about obviously in this particular discussion, like, this was dads and men and women having babies together. Doesn't really have to be dad, right, per se.
Right.
But in that space, to your point, if you're holding all of the caregiving and you're holding all of the decision making and the estate planning and all of these things, you are also often a child, a spouse, a grandchild, and cousin, a sibling losing someone.
Right.
And there's so much to hold in your own journey while holding this other person's journey, that for me in the childbirth space, I was like, no, let me hold this space so you can focus on being a partner, a dad, a husband, or whatever, right? And I think when I think about what you're doing, it reminds me of that, like that space you can hold so that the person also has their experience, the people, the care.
Yeah, I often tell people too, like a death doula's work is the glue in between everything. So you've got your family community around this person, plus your medical team, plus your community team, plus all these other components, and it can be very disjointed. It can be very confusing and hard. And who wants to deal with all that when I just want to be loving on my person, and also loving on myself.
Right.
And if you're someone that can support me and also support my loved one, and really bring sense to all the things that have to happen in order for an individual to have a sacred space in that death journey.
Right. No, I love that. I love that. So because we are talking sort of about, Women's History Month, International Women's Day, what do you think what characteristics, I think, for women are we bringing to this kind of work that maybe and I'm being very generalistic, but that we bring from our sort of our way of being in the world that aids your work in showing up in this way.
So you probably have heard the statistics, but I think it's 87% of working professional, well, not professional, but any working woman, we are the caregivers.
Yeah.
We are naturally, I want to say we're naturally socialized to be the caregivers.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean I have to have children to be a caregiver, right? So we're caregivers in our communities, our families, our friends, like even in the work that we do a lot of the times, we're socialized. So even if that doesn't come naturally to us, we may be socialized to believe that we have to do that.
Right.
So doula work has almost always been, either birth or death, has almost always been done by female-bodied people.
Right.
Or female identifying people,
right.
Or people who are just naturally geared towards nurturing and embodying caring for people.
Right.
And so, you know, for people who identify as women, we tend to be the ones that naturally gravitate towards when someone's in pain, when someone needs help, when someone needs support, this is where we go. And so 87% of working women are the caregivers. And what's interesting right now, it hasn't really happened in the past, hasn't had in the past, at least for 100 years, is that women are not only caring for their immediate family, so they've got their kiddos or that kind of community piece of it, but I'm also caring for my parents. I'm also caring for my elders. I'm also caring for, you know, other people that have kind of come and gone in my life as well. And so I think when you look at like the group of doulas, it is primarily people who identify as women.
Sure.
I think the other piece is that there is we've also been trained in our DNA to be very multitaskers.
Yeah.
And so in that, as a doula, that it's multitasking in a very different way. I am holding space for here while also thinking about like what else, what support, who needs to know, who doesn't need to know, you know, and kind of designing a plan for the family and or the individual. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. It totally does. No, it totally does. And I think it's interesting as you were talking, I was thinking like there's female, you know, women and people who identify as female, or those who just have this sort of natural inclination to step in and hold these kinds of spaces. I think there is an element of that is the reason why there is sort of this, the entry of life and the departure of life, right? Like there's this space holding that must happen. And those of us who have a natural inclination to hold that space are sort of drawn into the room, right? To say, let me hold the space, let me answer some questions, let me get you some resource, like you just said, like all the pieces, like holding those pieces together. So I do think, you know, there is, I was just this morning finishing a book called Difficult Women, and there's this whole chapter about time and how much of our time is unpaid second shift work, taking care of everyone. And that for a lot of women, there is a lot of joy in that. And also there's a burden in it. Right. And those two things hold space. And so when you can have access to a doula that can come in and, oh, let me lift the burden a bit and hold some of that space for you. I think there can be such beauty in that.
Yeah. There was a family that I worked with. It was a family of 3 sisters whose mother, when I first came working with the family, the mother was just put on hospice. And you know, we you know, kind of went through the whole journey of hospice, making sure that the medical team knew what the family wanted, what the individual wanted, which sometimes is contradictory to medical care outside of hospice. Because once you're in hospice, it's more about comfort than cure. And what I thought was really fascinating is when we were kind of going through like the planning of the funeral, the celebration of life, and navigating, you know, what that experience was going to be like. One of the things they kept talking about, the family kept talking about, is yes, yes, our mom wants people to be sad, but also our mom would want people to laugh and celebrate her and know about her quirkiness and know, that she loves the color pink. And, and I got to be such a part of such a beautiful event planning with that as well.
Mhm.
And doula work isn't just about like sitting vigil or sitting next to
Right.
the family or the individual who's dying. Like, this funeral and celebration worked with the sisters to plan everything. But then the day that we got there, um, they were not in a heart space to MC the funeral, and the preacher that they had brought had only a limited amount of time, and so it was like quick thinking, like, oh, okay, now I'm an MC for the funeral and the celebration of life. And so
Yeah.
I think that's another thing that's really interesting about not just the doula work, but what women can bring to that, is being able to really shift very quickly to understand that I'm going to be asked to do things that I hadn't thought about, or I'm not super comfortable with, but I'm going to do it anyways. And when I was in the corporate world, and even when I do consulting in the corporate, that's true in that space as well,
Yeah.
particularly for women. Is we're asked to do things that we didn't think we were going to have to do, or didn't know we were going to have to do, and we have to think very quickly and either code switch or just do what has to be done without thinking about like, analyzing everything. And then we just do it because also sometimes it just needs to be done.
Has to get done. No, it's my standing joke that on my best day at Klarna was the day I was solving a problem for H&M and trying to figure out why there wasn't any toilet paper in the toilets. And also, why was that my problem?
Exactly.
When the team's like, Leah, we don't have toilet paper. And I'm like, who are you asking? What are you talking? Why are you asking me this question? Right? But same day, I'm like, I got to solve this problem for H&M. Just when you think you might be important.
Then you're asked where the toilet paper is.
A little ego moment. Leah, where's the toilet paper? I don't know. I'm not in charge of toilet paper, but apparently I am.
Right?
But I think that's exactly what you're saying. The ability to really say there is no job that is not mine to do if I can do it, and if it needs to be done in this context, right? When I'm being of service to whatever my community is that I'm serving, or the people I'm serving. Yeah.
Well, and I also want to say too that there's also boundary setting that has to happen in that space too. And I know we're probably going to talk about this a little bit, because not only is there a boundary space of like, no, family, you actually do need to do this part because it's part of your journey, but also as a doula, in particularly because of my own personal experience, and then going through and being an actual death doula and a grief doula, like I had to more than triple in my own self-care.
Yeah.
And so boundaries have to be put into place as a doula, because this work is, anybody who's in death work or grief work, if you aren't taking care of yourself, you will burn out twice as fast as any other profession, particularly like in medical too. You see that too, people who are in profession, that part of the profession where there's constant dying. Like we saw that in COVID. How many medical professionals left the medical industry because of COVID and the experience that they had?
Yeah. And I mean, same Jaleesa, talking about Jaleesa again, like working in the ICU with her husband, who is an ICU doc in COVID, right? And I remember when there was a wave, COVID was kind of over in people's minds, but the numbers were going back up. And her husband one morning said, I don't think I can do this again. And he's tough bird, right? Like he's tough guy, right? But he was like, I don't know. But it's that feeling of like, what are we going to do to protect ourselves from this again? Like, what are we going to do to take care of ourselves? What are we, what do we need? Right. So talk a little bit about, what do you do to give yourself that extra self-care? What are some of the things that you kind of lean into for that?
This was something that I actually started to adopt in my consulting business, and it was actually because of a amazing coach that I had. I had two amazing coaches during this time. Her name is Trudy LeBron, and one of the things that she introduced to me in the process is how she runs her business. is that every 6 weeks you take a week off.
That's super
Like
smart.
no meeting, no work. Like if you want to catch up on work, you absolutely can.
Right.
But that time is like for your own personal and professional development. Maybe you just need to rest, and so I have adopted that. I still am navigating that well. And also, it's still on my calendar. I may not be able to take a full week off because I can't predict when people are going to pass.
Right.
But what I try to do is tack it on somewhere else.
Right.
Also, in the last year, I started doing creative journaling. I've never been like a daily write a journal. I would do it occasionally, but what I found through that creative journaling, which is like using colors and stickers and
Yeah.
just whatever you can find. Some people even use like objects that they use that day and put it in their their journal. What I found was that creative expression really helped process emotions and the things that I would see and hear, and doing that creative journaling. I just loved it so entirely much. I've always kind of been an avid, like voracious reader, but I have found that through this, I'll probably read several books a week
Yeah.
because my brain needs time to like not think about it as well.
Right.
And I'm really fortunate too that I've got people in my inner circle who, when I'm not taking care of myself, or they see the signs that I'm heading in a, frenzied or, panicked direction, I've got an amazing group of people who will hold me accountable. And that looks like, hey, what can I do for you to help relieve this load? Hey, Alison, let's go for a walk. Hey, can we just talk? Hey, have you done this? And just check in with me. There's no shame or guilt that comes with that. And they just lovingly hold space for me too.
I love that. I love the idea of taking a week off every 6 weeks. I'm gonna note that as something I could maybe do for myself too. I love that. But yeah, I think, I mean, everything you just talked about, so important. And that boundary, like making sure we have boundaries and making sure that we say, okay, there's some space here that is my space that I must hold for myself. I mean, when I started coaching full time, it was around the same time I took up knitting. And I never for a long time didn't make the correlation that my hardest days, like I would coach like 5 people back to back to back, and I would be exhausted, and I would find myself on the couch like frenzied knitting, right? Sometimes it was terrible. It'd be like filled with mistakes, but I didn't care. It was about motion and like working out some of what I had carried for others that day, right? And it was just fascinating to me that I was never crafty ever until that moment, right? And then I was like, I am a knitter, right? I'm like, okay, but it was there was an action to it, like you said with the creative journaling. Like there's something that comes out of it, and there is also some like I can pour energy into it to kind of release some of what's going on in my head and in my
Yeah,
body.
I think those are some other like creative ways of somatic movement and somatic healing, that we're doing something that allows movement in our energy, in our body, in our spirit to process emotions. Or, sometimes it is, sometimes it's good to compartmentalize it because
Yeah,
sometimes we just need to put it away.
yeah,
And being able to do some kind of movement, doesn't have to be quote exercise, but it could be knitting, it could be journaling, it could be writing, it could be, whatever it is. It's like where it's creating energetic movement,
yeah.
for
So
that.
so important. So I love that. Well, the last question I've been asking everyone for each of these interviews is, if you were going to give young Alison some advice that might be helpful to those that are listening, what would you tell her?
Number one is, girl, slow down. You ain't have to do everything, and you don't have to do it perfect. There's no such thing. Um, and you don't always have to hustle. And I've been hustling since 9, so you don't always have to hustle.
Yeah.
And in fact, hustle is an illusion. And
True.
lastly is like, you know what? You're beautiful. You're amazing. You're incredible.
Yeah.
And even on the days that you don't feel that, it's
Yes.
still true.
Yeah, I love that. No, I love that. Yeah, I mean, I think I really bought into hustle culture for a long time because it fit my natural disposition and my anxiety, right? Like the things I learned and picked up in trauma, I was like, let's use these. And so let's hustle with all the energy I have of unspent trauma, right? Let's use it, So but then eventually you start to work on it and you're like, oh, I need a nap, right? No, and I wanted to say something about something you said earlier. Let's see if I can say this without getting choked up. One of the things that I will never forget about you is that you were someone who would ask hard questions. You would ask people questions that you knew got to the heart of whatever was in the way, what was stalling them out. And I had, long before I had ever told anybody about what had happened to me as a kid and the trauma I had experienced, you were like poking around in it and like asking me questions and like, say more about blah, blah, blah. And I was like, who is this person? Why is she in my business? Right. and, and, but I think there is such a, we need people that will poke around, and we need to have people poke around at us, right? So that we'll relinquish that. And so I have always been really impressed, and it has been an encouragement and inspiration to me that you will talk about hard topics, right? Because I think that's, let's be honest, that's where the juiciest parts of living are, and the best parts of getting better, and the best parts of figuring out how to love others and ourselves, right? And I think you are someone who always has poked around in the hard stuff. And so I just want to tell you that I admire that, and it's been an inspiration to me. So
Yeah,
awesome. Yes. So, okay. Well, thank you for letting me interview you. I appreciate it. This was fun. And if you're watching this and you would like to donate to the Malala Fund, you'll see a little QR code somewhere right down here that you can grab the code, give a little money to help women and girls who are seeking education in places where they traditionally have not been able to get one, through the Malala Fund and her beautiful work in that trust. So if you would like to donate, there you go. Alison, thank you so much for letting me interview you, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.